Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're going to be trying to figure out the death of Dr. Julian P. Johnson back in 1939.
Yeah, it's a case that just never seems to go away, does it? Keeps people talking, even after all this time.
Right. Like a real-life mystery novel.
Almost. But with this, spiritual twist to it.
Totally. And that's what we're here to unpack, right? We've got excerpts from this book, The Mystery of Dr. Johnson's Death, plus court documents, letters, personal memoirs. It's wild how different all the stories are.
And that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's not just about the facts. It's about how different people see things.
Yeah.
How their perspective kind of shapes the whole story.
Okay, so Dr. Julian P. Johnson, American doctor, born in Kentucky, but his story, takes him to India, gets super involved with the Radhasomi movement over there.
Right, and Radhasomi, for anyone who's not familiar, it's this spiritual tradition focused on inner meditation, connecting to the divine through sound. They call it shab.
Yeah.
Sound meditation. So Johnson, though, he wasn't always into this.
No, not at all. In fact, early on, he was a devout Christian, tried to convert people in India to Christianity, actually. Then he kind of goes through this huge shift.
From missionary to, full-on Radhasomi devotee, what happened?
Well, he describes it in his book, With a Great Master in India, talks about his early religious fervor, then his disillusionment with, traditional beliefs.
Organized religion just wasn't doing it for him.
Yeah, exactly. He was looking for something more, something deeper. And he writes, organized religion had become this hollow shell to him, empty, no real inner experience.
So he's searching, right, for a genuine spiritual path, and that search leads him to...
Sawan Singh.
Right, Sawan Singh. Who is this guy?
The guru. A central figure in the Radhasomi movement at the time, had this big following.
And Johnson ends up at the Dera, right?
Yeah, the Dera. That's Sawan Singh's main center in Bees, India. Like a spiritual community. Lots of devotees living there, learning from the guru. So Johnson's there, deep into Radhasomi, and he also meets his wife there.
That's right, Elizabeth Bruce, an American woman, already a devotee of Sawan Singh.
So Elizabeth, she's important to this whole story, right?
Oh, definitely. Adds a whole other layer to it. You see, she originally followed a different Radhasomi guru at a place called Dayalbagh, but then she switched over to Sawan Singh's group at the Dera.
Okay, so a little bit of, inner movement drama there.
Yeah, you could say that, and it becomes pretty relevant as things unfold.
Okay, so we've got Dr. Johnson, the seeker, at the Dera with his wife Elizabeth, and then into this picture walks, a mountaineer.
Paul Petzoldt, young, ambitious American, just scaled K2, the second highest mountain in the world. Can you imagine?
Whoa, that's intense. So what's he doing at the Dera? Was he a devotee too?
Not quite. After his K2 climb, he was kind of struggling financially. He met the Johnsons in Kashmir, and Dr. Johnson, he offered him a job.
So Dr. Johnson needs an assistant.
Yeah, his health wasn't the best. He could use someone strong and capable around, and Petzoldt fit the bill.
But was Petzoldt into all the spiritual stuff?
From what we can tell, not really. He was pretty skeptical of Radhasomi, and, he wasn't as strict about following the rules as the other devotees were.
Oh, that's got to create some friction, right?
For sure. Add to that, Petzoldt's wife, Patricia, comes to the Dera. And she's not exactly comfortable there either.
So Patricia doesn't like it at the Dera. Why not?
It was all just a bit much for her. The atmosphere, the teachings. Her memoirs actually describe the whole experience as, unsettling. She felt out of place, even compared to the Salem witch trials at one point.
Well, that's a pretty intense comparison.
Yeah, she felt like there was this, paranoia in the air, a sense of suspicion. She even had this incident where she felt someone was watching her while she bathed.
Okay, yeah, that's creepy. So we've got Dr. Johnson, the spiritual doctor, his wife Elizabeth, Paul the adventurer, who's not so into the spiritual stuff, and his uneasy wife Patricia, all under one roof.
A real mix of personalities, right?
Yeah.
And it's in this mix, with all these different perspectives and maybe some unspoken tensions, that things start to really heat up.
And it all starts with food.
Seems so, yeah. An argument over food kicks off a chain of events that ends in tragedy.
Food, really? That seems kind of...
Mundane.
Yeah, mundane for something so serious to happen.
It might seem that way, but remember, this is a community where, every aspect of life is tied to their beliefs and practices. Food becomes symbolic of something much bigger.
Okay, I gotta know more about this food feud now. What happened?
Well, so Patricia, she gets sick not long after arriving, and she and Paul They start to think that maybe Elizabeth Bruce is messing with her food.
Messing with her food, like trying to poison her.
Well, they didn't use that word exactly.
Yeah.
But Patricia mentions in her memoirs that she always felt worse after eating meals Elizabeth had prepared.
Mm.
And then Paul even writes about it in a letter. He says they were often given different food than the other Dera residents.
Huh. So different food. Why, though? What would Elizabeth's motive even be?
Well, the sources, they don't really say why Elizabeth might have done this if she even did. But there is this mention of an argument about Kundalini.
Kundalini. Okay, I've heard that word before. What's that got to do with anything?
Well, Kundalini is like this powerful energy force in yoga. Something that's like dormant at the base of the spine.
Yeah.
Certain practices can supposedly awaken it.
Yeah, and lead to, like, these intense spiritual experiences.
Right, exactly. But it's also supposed to be a pretty delicate process. It needs to be approached carefully with the right guidance. So anyway, this argument about Kundalini, it seems like a comment about it sparked a clash between Paul and Elizabeth.
So who said what?
That's the thing. The accounts differ. Patricia claims she made a joke about it, nothing serious. But Paul, he insists he was the one who made a comment, and it wasn't a very nice one.
Yep.
Apparently, it really upset Elizabeth.
Okay, so you've got the food tensions, this weird argument about Kundalini. I can already feel things getting kind of intense.
Yeah. And tragically, it all comes to a head on the night of January 25th, 1939.
That's the night Dr. Johnson died.
Hmm.
Right, so what exactly happened?
That's where things get murky. Everyone agrees there was a huge blow-up between Paul and Elizabeth. But their versions of what led up to it are totally different. And Patricia, she was sick in bed. She didn't see the actual fight.
Okay, so we just have Paul's side of the story.
But we have what he wrote in a letter to his family right after it happened, and then later what he told Patricia, which she includes in her book.
So how are they different?
In his letter, Paul says the argument started when he was taking food to Patricia. He says Elizabeth confronted him, accused him of disrespecting her and the Dera's customs. He makes it sound like it was just between him and Elizabeth. But in Patricia's account, she talks about the food tension, saying that Paul had gone to Dr. Johnson to complain about how they were being treated.
Huh. So it's like one version's this sudden outburst and the other's more about, resentment building up.
Right. And you got to think about it. Paul's letter was written days after the incident. Patricia's account comes years later. Time trauma, trying to make sense of it all. You can change how you remember things.
Oh, for sure. Memory's a tricky thing. So in all this mess, a shotgun appears. Where did that come from?
Ah, the shotgun. The accounts agree that it was there at the Dera for protection. They had problems with rabid dogs. And Paul, being the less spiritual one, he usually dealt with them.
Okay, so the shotgun was there, but how did it end up being used?
That's where the stories really diverge. Paul claims in his letter that Elizabeth grabbed the shotgun and tried to shoot him. He says he had to wrestle it away from her, and that's how Dr. Johnson got hurt.
So Paul's saying it was self-defense.
That's his story. But Patricia's version is different. She doesn't say Elizabeth pointed the gun at Paul. She describes it more like a struggle. The gun went off accidentally while Paul was trying to get it away from Elizabeth.
Hold on, so one minute Elizabeth's the aggressor trying to shoot Paul, and the next it's like a tragic accident.
Exactly, and that leaves us with some big questions. Was Elizabeth really trying to kill Paul, or was she defending herself, maybe protecting her husband? Did the gun go off by mistake, or was there a moment when someone actually pulled the trigger?
We'll probably never know for sure, I guess. So what happened after Dr. Johnson died? Did they arrest Paul right away?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. Instead of charging him with murder, Paul ends up pleading guilty to simple hurt.
Simple hurt? That seems awfully light. A man is dead.
Right. That's where Bhagat Singh comes back in. Remember the lawyer? The devotee of Salwan Singh. Well, he advised Paul to plead guilty to this lesser charge, probably to avoid bad publicity for the Dera and the guru.
So they were trying to sweep it under the rug.
Looks like it. There was definitely an effort to downplay the whole thing, protect the reputation of the Radhasoni community.
And Paul just went along with it. Why?
Think about it. He's a young guy in a foreign country, suddenly facing these serious charges. He's probably scared and confused, relying on the advice of people he thinks are helping him, like Bhagat Singh, who had a lot of authority at the Dera.
Yeah, and the Radhaswami movement, they were pretty powerful back then.
Right? Oh, yeah. A lot of influence.
Yeah.
So Paul, he might have felt pressured to just go along with whatever they told him.
So he pleads guilty, and that's it. Case closed.
Not so fast. Enter the American consul, C.E. Macy. He wasn't buying the simple hurt story.
He thought something was fishy.
Totally. He called it a concocted story, a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth.
So he starts investigating.
Oh, yeah. Macy was thorough. He interviewed witnesses, dug up evidence. and he became convinced that Elizabeth had actually used the shotgun. That changed everything.
Wow. So Elizabeth's actions, whatever her reasons, they ended up helping Paul.
Kind of ironic, right? The witnesses couldn't get their story straight. And with Maisie pushing for the truth, the judge ended up dismissing the charges. There wasn't enough evidence to prove Paul did anything intentional.
So Paul walks free. What about Elizabeth? What happened to her?
Sadly, she died a few years later. She was never in great health anyway. And Bhagat Singh, the lawyer, he died too, a few years before his guru, Swan Singh. It's like this whole event left a mark on everyone, changed their lives in ways they probably never expected.
Yeah, that's heavy. Speaking of unexpected, you mentioned earlier that Paul, even though he wasn't into the Radhasoami stuff at first, had a really intense spiritual experience while he was at the Dera. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So Paul, he's talking about this experience he had while he was at the Dera, practicing Shabd yoga meditation. Remember, that's what Swan Singh taught.
Right, the sound meditation. And he had like a major breakthrough.
He describes it as incredibly vivid and blissful.
Hmm.
And get this, he compares it to the high he got from mountain climbing, drinking alcohol, even taking opiates. He said nothing else in his life came close to that.
Wow. Okay, so even though he was skeptical at first, something shifted for him there. At the Dera, it's like the tragedy, all the craziness. Maybe it opened him up somehow.
Maybe. It's hard to say. The sources don't really get into what triggered the experience,
Yeah.
but Paul does mention that Dr. Johnson used to talk about having visions during his meditations.
Oh, yeah. Like what kind of visions?
He said he would see figures like Jesus, Confucius, Plato, all sorts of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah, like even though they were both Westerners drawn to this Eastern tradition, they had these very different but also kind of similar experiences. Like their spiritual journeys were intertwined, even though they were on their own paths.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole story so compelling. It's not just about figuring out who did what to whom. It's about these bigger questions about human nature and faith and how we all see the world so differently.
Right. It started with the death of Dr. Johnson, but it's become about so much more. We've got these conflicting accounts, hidden agendas, spiritual awakenings. It's like peeling back layers of an onion.
Exactly. And it makes you think about how we construct our own realities. You know, how our beliefs and experiences shape what we believe is true.
We've talked about Dr. Johnson's writings, how they continue to inspire people even today, and about how the events at the Dera impacted Paul's life. He went on to found the National Outdoor Leadership School, right?
He did. Became quite successful. But he was always followed by the rumors and accusations from that night in India.
Yeah, it's like even when you achieve great things, the past can still haunt you.
Definitely. It shapes how people see you, how you see yourself.
We've uncovered a lot today, but I feel like we're left with even more questions. What really happened that night? Why did Elizabeth do what she did? And could Paul's spiritual experience have been influenced by the tragedy? You know, like maybe being in that heightened emotional state, facing death, open him up to something deeper.
It's a question we'll never know the answer to, but it certainly adds to the mystery of it all.
It really does. Well, that's been our deep dive into the mysterious death of Dr. Julian P. Johnson. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of a spiritual scandal and the complexities of human experience. We'll be back soon with another fascinating story to unravel. Until then, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the mysteries of life.